right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I think we're going to give it another minute or two here before we get started. All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. This is our last webinar of TMG's summer into fall webinar series. And joining me today is Mr. Tim Bauer, who is our Director of TMG Association Solutions Consulting. I am Joe Sapp. I'm our Chief Operating Officer. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about technology utilizing technology to manage membership and engagement. If you're not familiar with TMG, we are a full service association management company. We represent over 30 associations that utilize our services for full service management. That means over 50 professional staff that support those associations. Again, I'm Joe. This is Tim joining me today. Tim, you want to give us a little bit of your background?
Yeah, sure. I have over 25 years in the industry and association management. Many of those years geared specifically to medium-sized organizations.
Right. Thanks, Tim.
So we just wanted to start this presentation with a little quote. Technology is a useful servant, but a dangerous master. The person who said that was actually a Norwegian philosopher and historian that died in 1938 and winner of the Nobel Prize. And it is, it's kind of crazy that a quote from the 1920s/30s still has some really relevant impact today with what we're facing. So a little bit about where we came from, and this is pretty recent history. Probably over the last 10 years, there's been significant shifts, and Joe will touch on them a little bit. But previously, pre-cloud, associations had very rigid technology and structures to deal with, and there was a large investment made in that. So because of the additional investment into technology and people to manage the member data and the platforms, it was really cost prohibitive for some smaller to medium, even large organizations to buy into that platform. Many of them were locked systems that only a few people could go in and alter, and they did require a high level of expertise. And some of them actually required technical coding ability. And measuring engagement from your members and your non-members really was just a matter of maybe an annual survey to your members and your non-members, maybe looking at the feedback from your annual meeting or your regional meetings that you're having and taking those. There wasn't a continual measurement and a back and forth.
Yeah, Tim, I remember 15 years ago, we had one membership database in TMG that was IMIS, and that was a software that we installed on our own server. It was not connected to the internet directly. You had to buy a different piece of technology that interfaced between the member website and IMIS. And we only had a limited number of licenses. There'd be maybe 3 people in the office that had a license that actually knew how to use it. And, if a member called in and said, I'd like to update my information, you'd write on a Post-it note, and then they'd go and take it to the member services person, and they would go into the system and update it. So very rigid, very costly. Those were systems that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to implement, and you'd have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to maintain it, to add new modules, to maintain it each year and update it and upgrade it. So very rigid.
I think the other thing there, Joe, is there wasn't a lot of flexibility.
Yeah.
Many times you had a set number of demographic fields or even set demographics. So maybe sometimes it wasn't even a number of fields. Many times it had to be, it was rigid throughout your database structure. So yeah, great points.
Yeah, and when you talk about rigid, the things that were tracked in that system were probably what membership dues, when they paid, when they registered for an event, and then their contact information. That was it. There was no other data flowing into it because every piece of data that went into it was manually entered. It wasn't entered by the member themselves. So that's a bit of where we were, where we are now. Technology and software has a much lower barrier to entry. It's something that you can, if you have a credit card and you have access to the internet, you can go buy an AMS system, association management system. There are platforms out there that you can go get paid for and start updating the website, updating the database today. There's no waiting. There's no need to interface with a salesperson. There's no need to go through an implementation process. You can just go pay for it and get it. Smaller associations have that kind of access now to some pretty powerful tools and at much lower price points. I could name a few that are out there that are even free. If you have a certain number of members, you can get access to it for free. And technology now for associations is managed much less by IT staff and more by program staff. So, to go back to where we were, there was a point in time where, our internal IT team consisted of 4 or 5 people, and maybe 2 of them were dedicated IMIS experts. That's all they did. They developed IMIS, they managed it. And we're not talking from a user perspective, we're talking about actual IT experts in the system, coding, dealing with the fine details of the platform. Today, that's not the way associations function with much of their technology. It's a lot of it's subscription based. You're dealing with the support of those platforms, those software providers, and your day-to-day administrative staff and your program staff are the ones that are managing the platform. They're entering data, they're creating web pages, they're processing renewals in the system. It's not done by dedicated IT staff.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
I
Tim.
think, Joe, just to add to that, I think, you mentioned the various levels of software that's out there. That is really important to note because you want to make sure, and Joe, you touched on the previous presentation, that you do an assessment to really gauge what your needs are. Because there are various platforms, they have various costs, and they offer various implementation help. And many times that implementation help is necessary to get you started, whether it be building forms, transferring some web pages, providing 4 to 8 hours of training so that your team knows what they need to do. But part of the use of that technology is I think important to note, the cheapest is not always the right solution. So really think where you're at and then where you want to be in a few years.
Right. And, that last point on the slide there, data is everywhere and coming at you all the time. As we mentioned earlier, there was really a single point of entry for data into the database 15 years ago. Today, members are in the database themselves. They're entering information. You could have different forms on your website that's pushing information into the site, into the database. So there's a lot more data and there's a lot more availability to have bad data because there is all those different access points and there's all those different systems in use.
Yeah, so talking about engagement a little bit, certainly the data collection is one primary form of engagement. What are the members willing to give up? How often can they update it? And the technologies help with that. But defining engagement, member engagement really is the ongoing interaction between the association and the member, and not just in the chase for dollars, but in exchange for meaningful value, whether that be shared resources, networking sessions, responding quickly to customer service questions. It really is, a lot of people define engagement between an association and membership really as an exchange of dollars. if you do everything else right from an engagement standpoint, the dollars will come. The members will remain. So again, engagement means different things to different associations. You really need to take time to define them. Is your social media presence the highest thing? Is how many people open your e-blast? Is it how many people come to your events? What's the and a lot of this will be defined on what is your primary value that you're trying to give to your members. Is it a resource page that you want to make sure gets updated very routinely and that your members visit so that you're seen as the go-to place for that knowledge? So again, you really need to think about what you're trying to accomplish, what you're trying to deliver to the members, how you add value to the person or the organizations that you're working with. And then from there, define what is important engagement to you, because it is going to be different for many organizations. And why is engagement good? Engaged members stay longer. On average, they stay 4 years longer than non-members. And it's been a few years since I looked at this, but new members into your organization, if not onboarded properly, when I did this for another organization years ago, they renewed at about 30 to 40%, where once you get that person to rejoin that second year, you're probably jumping to between a 75 and a 95% retention rate on that member ongoing. So that continual engagement is really important. And that's where I said, if you do the engagement right, the dollars will follow.
Yeah, Tim, I don't think that I've been involved with a discussion with a potential TMG client where the question hasn't come up, how do you grow membership? What are you going to do? What are the specific things that it takes to grow membership? And a lot of the time I respond with, growing just to grow doesn't necessarily mean success for an organization. Having an engaged membership is going to spell greater success, in my view. What you've said, I typically say, if you build it, they will come. If you're building the value and you're able to track how you're engaging with your members, you're going to be able to continually build new programs and services that are valuable to those members. They're going to stick around. They're going to pay for membership dues, but they're going to pay for other products and services and be engaged in different ways. That's going to be a much greater sustainability for the organization than just saying, we need more members. Because if you keep growing membership wise, but they're not participating in the conference, if they're not submitting articles to your journal, if they're not doing those other things, then those programs and services will die off. And then you're losing value for other members. So it really is about building it, and they're going to be there. And, as we talk about defining engagement in this way, a lot of organizations go through the strategic planning process and they talk about those objectives that they're going to have and how they're going to measure success there. But I think engagement kind of drops off. I don't think it's always in that discussion. I think it's always, well, how do you define engagement? And for a lot of organizations, it's, well, how many people click on the emails? It really goes to those data metric points that are readily available and not anything past that. It doesn't go into the detail of how they're truly engaging across the whole association. So as we measure engagement, technology is only helpful in measuring it if you defined it and you put in place systems to measure it. Going back to my statement just a minute ago about the strategic planning process, and are you talking about engagement during that process? It can come in many different formats, but in general, integrated systems are the first step. As I mentioned, a lot of times you hear somebody talk about engagement and it's, well, how many people clicked on this link in an email? How many people are following us on Twitter and Facebook? That's not engagement. It is engagement, but it's not the only defining features of engagement. So when you talk about measuring engagement, you want to go farther than just those key pieces that you see there. Segmented systems and databases, they create extra work and inaccurate reporting. And that's another piece that we're going to talk about here when we talk about the ways to measure engagement and also a case study of how that's going to look.
Yeah, and Joe, I would just add to that. The other thing with segmented systems is it creates inconsistent and inaccurate communications and measurements. And if you have your database in one area, but you're doing your emails through Constant Contact, if you don't export that group that you're trying to communicate with every time and doing a fresh import, you are not communicating with everyone. So back to the engagement of newer members, you could have members that joined over the past 2 to 3 weeks, and unless you're doing a fresh export and import, those folks aren't getting communication from you. There's also the possibility of human error as you have too many different segmented systems. So, the integrated systems, as much as you can, are key to measuring engagement.
So Tim, you brought up a great point, and this is a general case study, and I could probably point to several organizations that we know that have this in place. Take a look at this technology stack and ask yourself if it looks familiar. You have an AMS system, and I put MemberClicks. It could be any AMS system out there, but they have a WordPress website or any other type of website. MailChimp for email marketing, another LMS system, and then maybe Basecamp for their board portal. And another one came to me, perhaps they're using SurveyMonkey to collect submissions for their annual meeting, or perhaps they're using it to collect nominations for the board or some other type of submission tool. So does that look familiar? I think it does. To me, it certainly does. I think I can point to a number of our clients that even have similar structures in place where you have all these different platforms, but none of them are talking. And the defining feature of all these are that they're accessible and they're cheap. And I don't mean cheap in a bad way, but they're affordable. They're a small association can get into these platforms today, and they're affordable. So each of them on their own, they're great. They do what they're supposed to do. But when you put them in place, what does it mean? It means they're not talking. You have a structure much like Tim just described, where you have outdated information somewhere, but it also creates a lot of work for staff. It creates a lot of work to manage it, because when you look at this, you may just see these great tools that are really easy to use, but you've got 6 different databases collecting 6 different sets of information. How do you collate that? How do you bring that all together to make actionable decisions based on good data to talk about engagement? If you've got your board nominations have been in SurveyMonkey for 5 years and they're not talking to the membership database, how do you take a look at that and understand who's really engaged, who's been involved, who's submitted to be nominated to the board for the past 6 years but hasn't been chosen? And maybe you're making the decision to not include them because that data is segmented. It's sitting over in another system, so you don't fully appreciate the work and effort they've put in other areas of the organization that you haven't considered because it's just not readily available. And as I said, it just takes extra time. It means the staff, your team, is spending extra time managing 6 different platforms, 6 different databases of information.
And to add to that, Joe, I mean, ideally everything would be all in one system. But as we know, certain systems have limitations in one area because they focus on another. So I don't think we're saying you're ever going to hit 100% one platform integration, but that should be the overarching goal. Where you can collapse everything you can into the single system. And then if you need to go out for special items and review, abstracts submission is a good one, Joe, because an item like MemberClicks does a lot of things well. But you may need to go, if you have scientific abstracts, you may need to go to a different vendor just because of the blind review process or something. So we're not saying that you need to collapse everything into one, but that should be the goal. And as you can do that, there will be a substantial benefit to the organization for doing that.
Yeah, and great point, Tim. And it's not always financially feasible to find that. Is there a silver bullet out there? Is there a platform that we've seen that does all of these things all in one place and it does it really well? No. It's just, unless you want to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that's not what our typical client has the budget for. But the point being is that uh, integrated systems, condensing systems, that should be a priority. It should be just as much of a priority as what does the front end of the website look like? When you talk about how much is it going to cost us staff time to manage all these different systems? And could that money that you're spending on antiquated technology and having to manage all the systems be better spent on integrating systems to making sure that they're all talking together and working for the organization?
Yeah, and realize there's a give and take. Maybe you give up one small thing to integrate something in, but what you gain could be bigger than what you could possibly lose. Okay, so just some keys to measure engagement. We go back to, again, defining what engagement means to your organization. Then it's important that you bend the systems to measure that, but also to make sure that what you're tracking is what you need to track, whether it be specialty or place of work or primary occupation or years in the field. To Joe's point, how many committees have they been involved in? Is this a potential future leader? So decide what you want to track and then design the system around it. As much as possible, ensure the systems are integrated and talking to each other. Make sure that the reporting and benchmarks are clear for the decision makers. And make sure that the data is in a good format where it doesn't confuse the board or overcomplicate the reporting. Because again, data is only as good as it's going to be used. So if you overcomplicate the reporting, many times that data will not be used. You provide actionable insights as you report, and you make sure that not only is the insight, but how you're going to act on it and what the prescribed outcome, if you act on it, what is the measurement of success for that particular action. And then you got to stay data driven. The benefit of these integrated systems is you do have all your data in one place as much as possible. And what that allows you to do is, within minutes, dump a report, do a nice export, get some good information rather quickly, so that it goes back to being actionable and reporting it easy. So as you're doing your exports, people don't want to see a 2,000 row spreadsheet. They just want to know the highlights of what that data is. So be careful in how you report that out.
Yeah, Tim, my key on this slide here, and this goes to both our staff, our team, any association staff, but also volunteer leaders, is around being data driven. And for staff, that means providing concise reports, providing recommendations based on that data. And to remove, and it does become uncomfortable because you may be going against the traditional views of the association and how they've operated, where you hear, well, I heard from our members about this, but using data means using data. It means going with what you're actually seeing. You've defined these things as key engagement points. You've built systems to report on it, and you got to act on those things. And it does become uncomfortable because it does go against perhaps how you've operated in the past, but that's key to moving quickly, to addressing what are real concerns, real issues for your members by acting on the data that you have. And for staff, that means putting it in a format that's digestible for volunteer leaders to see it clearly and to make actual recommendations instead of them having to do any guesswork. It's providing them with real steps they can take that are feasible, that are within budget, that address the data that you have, instead of just giving all this raw data and expecting them to make the decisions from that. That's not what they're there for. They're there to receive your insights and your recommendations based on what you see as staff.
Yeah, well, and Joe, I think, just to put this out there. What we're saying is nothing new. I go back to Joe. I know you know this book well, but the 7 Measures of Success from 2006. One of the 7 things that successful associations do that mediocre don't is be data driven. That was highlighted again in Race for Relevance, the importance of being data driven. So those are 2 great resources if you want to read a little bit more about being data driven, but in a digestible format. I think each book is only about 120 pages or so, give or take. But those are some great resources if you want to read a little bit more about it.
So that brings us to our end here. We do have some time for questions and discussions. Feel free to drop those into the Q&A box here.
So Joe, I do see a question that popped up. The question is, when you talk about integrating systems, are there systems that are more important to integrate than others within your primary database? And do you see systems that still are better off remaining outside of that main system? And in particular, LMS, SurveyMonkey, some of these, some areas where maybe these AMS that are easily accessible, both cost and usage wise for associations, but maybe they just don't have a robust area in other areas. So are there areas where you see that occurring?
Yeah, I think that, when it's a great question. And I think I would point to what you defined as important engagement points to answer that question. So if you've defined that we want to have better communication with our members, then that's probably going to drive you to make sure that you have robust reporting on email engagement, social media engagement. And that's probably what would drive you to have an integrated approach to how you're reaching out to members, to your communications. So I think it really comes down to what you've defined as important for engagement, and then you build that integration strategy around that. And that goes 2 ways. One, front end user ease of use, and then administrative ease of use. When we talk about having an integrated AMS platform that has a website, and then also using another website platform because it just looks better, there's 2 different discussions to that. One is, what's the user experience like on the front end, but what's the administrative process on the back end? Does the staff have to know an extra level of detail on how to update the website because there is another platform involved? And then you talk about, is it easier to integrate? Is it easier or more readily available to just use the out-of-the-box solution from the AMS platform? So again, I think it really does need to be driven from what you've defined as key to your engagement, and then make those decisions based on, where can we integrate? Is it an integration that's going to impact front-end user experience, or is this an administrative function that's best served?
Yeah, and I think the other part is, Joe had, and Joe, I believe they're going to get these slides. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah.
So if you guys go to the technology stack slide, I think one of the important things to do is to assess what you're using in those 5 to 7 key areas, why you're using it, and what you need to use it, what resources are needed. And whether there is another option. I will tell you, there are some great AMS systems out there, but if you're doing a medical or a scientific type of annual meeting where you're going to have 4 to 5 reviewers and they need to be blinded and double blinded, and a lot of that work needs to happen, you're probably not going to find that in an AMS. You're probably going to have to go to someone who specializes in abstract submission. That's also typically a one-off use for most organizations that you can easily download. So look at the importance of the organization, but also look at the capability of what's out there and really address what you need. Joe, there is another question if we have time for it.
Sure.
And I can take a first crack at this. What are some platforms you would recommend? And that is a very wide question, because it really, and maybe you can add a comment to the Q&A, but it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. A lot of it is the size of your database. how you want to engage, how many meetings you have, what the abstract process is. Do you have distance remote learning that has enduring credit where you might need to have an LMS system and outside of your AMS learning management system? So there's not, let's see here, I believe, how can you identify if a platform is appropriate for your size? So that really comes down to doing a needs assessment. And I believe, Joe, we talked about that at another webinar. And
Yeah.
Paul, I'll get back to you and see if we can get you that recording. That really, you need to do an assessment as to what you need. Look at how many records, how many meetings, how many e-blasts are due to. Most of these AMS systems, whether it be MemberClicks, YM, Star Chapter, I'm sure I'm forgetting a bunch of them at this point, MemberLeap, there's a lot of them out there, but most of them go on the number of profiles you have in the database. Some of them go by the number of events or forms you need. And then some of them also have a limit to how many times you can do e-blasts based on number of contacts. So, and I will tell you, using these systems for about 12 years now, I've never run into a situation where I've ran out of email blasts. So that's usually not a heavy consideration, but the pricing will change based on the number of profiles that you have.
Yeah, and Paul, I know we're going to talk about it in an hour and a half, so I can follow up with you. But yeah, there are a lot of factors that go into what is the best platform for speaking in terms of an AMS, an association management system, because a lot of the out-of-the-box platforms, when you talk about a YM or a MemberClicks, they do a lot of different functions pretty well, but they are out of the box. They're less customizable. So a key point there is, what systems do integrate with them seamlessly. And I know you mentioned Higher Logic. That is an example, one that we've had a lot of success with, where organizations want better reporting, more automation, and better design ability from their email marketing platform. And Higher Logic does have an email marketing platform that integrates seamlessly with your membership. And it's something we've done with several clients where there isn't a separate database for the email marketing. It's all integrated. It's all running off of your main database. And that goes with the Higher Logic's community website as well. It's only one login for members. So it really does depend on what are the true needs of the organization and functionality wise. And then what's your budget? How much are you willing to invest for your AMS system based on the features it has?
Yeah, well, and Joe, just to close that out a little bit, if there are specific questions about process or some of the options out there, Joe's going to share a slide with our emails. Feel free to please drop me an email. I'm more than happy to take 15 to 30 minutes with you, go over some of the options, see where you're at. TMG, and I don't want this to become a sales pitch. TMG does offer that we do technology assessments and we'll research kind of what you need, and we do offer 1 to 3 suggestions based on what's the best fit for your organization. We do a price analysis, but I'm also more than happy to take a few minutes and walk you through that process in case you want to do that initially yourself. And I can, we can talk about some of the options that are out there that I'm most familiar with and that have worked well in the past. And just as a caveat, I'm probably familiar with 4 to 6 of the who knows, but as a general rule, when you're looking at an AMS or any technology, you want something that's been in business multiple years and has a wide user base. Those are both very important items to look at. Oh, and tech support. How do they do their tech support? Because those 3 things drive a lot of your decision. How long in business? That talks about longevity. The worst thing you could do is go with, and I don't want to talk bad about any startups, but how bad would it be if you went to a company, you integrated everything, and in 2 years they decided that they weren't going to remain in business? The wide user base is important because it's going to be updated regularly when there are issues, because they're going to be getting complaints and suggestions from a wide audience of varying users. And then the tech support is important. I prefer phone tech support over online or email tech support, because if you need to get something out, there's nothing worse than waiting a few hours for an answer when you're waiting to get an email out. more than happy to talk those things through with anyone. So if you just want to take a picture of this slide, feel free to drop me an email. We can schedule some time.
Great.
I know we went a little bit over, Joe. It's about 12:37. I know we tried to end these at 12:35.
Well, you were talking way too much, Tim, but I think that was great. So thanks everybody. Again, as Tim said, please do email us if you have questions. We'll get the recording out of this, the slides out as well. And again, email, ask questions. We're happy to help out and provide a little bit more context to anything we spoke about.
Great. Excellent.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody.
All right. Bye-bye.